Hello everyone, my name is Al Parsai. I'm a regulated Canadian immigration consultant. I have represented literally thousands of clients from 41 different countries so far in the past 9 years. And I'm also the author of 88 Tips on Immigration to Canada, which is a book available on Amazon websites. I have written more than 1,200 articles about the subject of immigration and settlement in Canada. I'm the CEO of Parsai Immigration Services, which is located in downtown Toronto. We also have a branch in Edmonton, Alberta. I'm the instructor of Immigration Consulting Diploma at Ashton College. I also deliver courses specific to immigration for immigration practitioners. The purpose of these videos that I will publish in the near future is to review all different aspects of immigration and settlement in Canada. The first video that you are watching right now focuses on general aspects of immigration. I have divided actually this session into 3 topics. The first topic is we will talk about immigration authorities or those organizations that are related to immigration to Canada. Then we will briefly review different options for immigration to Canada. And then by the end of the session, we will also talk about the subject of temporary stay in Canada. So without further ado, let's talk about organizations that are active in immigration to Canada. The first and foremost is IRCC. IRCC stands for Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada. This organization is active in 2 different aspects of immigration. The first one is policy making. In other words, they come up with a text of the immigration law. Of course, they pass it on to the Parliament of Canada to finalize it. And they also work on immigration regulations, policies in terms of how to handle immigration. They create manuals or operational manuals for immigration officers. They also create bulletins in terms that we are dealing with a specific matter and it needs to be addressed as soon as possible. So that's one portion, which is the policies regarding immigration to Canada. The second portion is, of course, the decision-making portion. We have some immigration officers. Those immigration officers are in charge of receiving the immigration applications or visa applications or work permit or study permit applications. They review the documents they receive, they review the forms, and then based on that, they decide whether to grant a visa or permanent residency to, or even citizenship to somebody who applies for any of those. IRCC used to be called CIC or Citizenship Immigration Canada. Many people still know IRCC as CIC, but in fact, the government of Canada changed the name from IRCC to CIC in November 2015. The next organization is called CBSA or Canada Border Services Agency. CBSA deals with import and export of goods. But on top of that, it also focuses on people crossing our borders, especially people who try to enter Canada. In fact, when you go to a Canadian airport or a land crossing from the US, the person that you see is an employee of CBSA, not an employee of IRCC. That employee usually, at least the first one, is called a BSO or Border Services Officer. They look at your passport and documents and they decide whether to allow you in the country or not and for how long you may stay in the country. Obviously, if you are a permanent resident of Canada or a citizen of Canada, they will let you to enter Canada and live for as long as you want, unless there are some complications going on for permanent residents. On top of that, they also enforce the immigration law. So in other words, some of the CBSA officers, they are like the police for the immigration. And they deal with illegal residents of Canada, irregularities in terms of entering Canada, detaining people under the immigration law, deporting people from Canada, and even representing the immigration minister to Immigration Refugee Board, which is like a court that they deal with it. So CBSA plays a very important role in terms of handling the immigration law. On top of CBSA and IRCC, we have another organization which is called IRB, which stands for Immigration and Refugee Board of Canada. IRB is like a court. It's actually an administrative tribunal. It is divided in 4 different divisions. The immigration division deals with detention reviews of people who are detained under the immigration law. It deals with inadmissibility hearings if somebody is inadmissible to Canada and they want to deport him from Canada. The immigration appeal division, which is the second division, deals with appeal hearings from sponsorship applications, for example, or immigration division decisions. And it's a very big portion of the Immigration Refugee Board of Canada. We also have another division which is called RPD, or Refugee Protection Division. This section deals with those people who filed for asylum or refugee status either at the port of entry to Canada or inside Canada. And RAD, or Refugee Appeal Division, deals with appeals of the decisions made by RPD. On top of IRB, CBSA, and IRCC, there are many other organizations that they somehow directly or indirectly deals with immigration to Canada. The 3 big names are the Federal Court of Canada, which handles judicial review cases, CSIS, which is the spy agency of Canada and makes sure that people who enter Canada are not threat to our security and safety, and also RCMP, which is the Federal Police Force of Canada. RCMP especially works hand in hand with CBSA in terms of deporting people from Canada or enforcing the immigration law. That's it about the organizations. Now let's think about and talk about immigration options to Canada. So we can divide immigration options to Canada in 3 major categories, and this is based on Section 12 of the Immigration Refugee Protection Act, which is the immigration law. So Section 12 divides people who can become immigrants into 3 major groups. One group is called family reunification. It means that you want to join your family members in Canada. The second group is called economic immigration. That means you immigrate to Canada because of your skills, because of your age, because of your knowledge of English or French languages, because of the investment that you can make in Canada or create jobs for Canadians, and so on and so forth. The third group is the group of refugees. These are people who either submit their refugee request to UNHCR outside Canada in a third country, and eventually Canada resettles them to Canada, or the people who apply for refugee status in Canada at a port of entry or after entering Canada. If you want to compare these 3 groups, roughly speaking, about 20 to 30% of the immigrants to Canada, they are under family reunification. About 50 to 60% they are people who immigrate under the economic classes, and again about 10 to 20% are refugees. And these numbers obviously fluctuate year to year. So what is exactly family reunification? Probably the largest group of people who immigrate to Canada are under family reunification are spouses and children. It means a Canadian citizen or a permanent resident of Canada marries to somebody from outside Canada, and then, or that person could be present inside Canada but a foreign national, and then they sponsor that person to Canada. Obviously, if that person has children, they could also sponsor them to Canada, or they could sponsor their own children or adopted children to Canada. The other group that fall under family reunification are parents and grandparents. So if you are a citizen of Canada or a permanent resident of Canada, you have lived in Canada for a few years, you have enough income, then you may be able to sponsor your parents or grandparents to Canada. And the third group are other family members. So under special circumstances, unfortunately not very wide open, but under special circumstances which are defined under Section 117 of the immigration regulations, a Canadian citizen or permanent resident could sponsor their brothers, sisters, cousins, or any other family member to Canada. But point of warning, not a very open option in very special circumstances. And obviously, I will dedicate one session to family reunification, and in that session, I will try to expand on this and explain it to you. Okay, the second group of immigrants are economic immigrants. Again, we can divide economic immigrants into two major groups. One group is federal immigration. The second group is provincial or Quebec immigration. So when we talk about federal immigration, it means those people who want to immigrate to Canada to any province but Quebec. And they submit their applications directly to the federal government of Canada, and if the federal government approves them, they can enter Canada, and after entering Canada, they may live or work any place in Canada. A majority of immigrants to Canada, of course, immigrate under the federal immigration options. But when it comes to provincial options or Quebec option, it means that a province of Canada selects you because they believe that you're a good candidate for them, and they issue you something that we call it a certificate of nomination, and with the help of that certificate of nomination, you apply for immigration to Canada and you enter Canada. Obviously, your destination needs to be that specific province. Canada has 10 provinces and 3 territories. With the exception of one territory, which is Nunavut, the rest of provinces and territories of Canada, they have immigration options under provincial programs. Quebec is different because they have signed an agreement with the federal government that everybody who wants to immigrate to Quebec, they exclusively need to apply through Quebec. That's why when you apply under federal programs, your destination needs to be anywhere but Quebec. Let's talk about federal economic immigration a little bit more. We can divide this federal immigration programs, economic immigration programs, into 4 major groups. The first group would be express entry, which is a system of immigration to Canada. Federal express entry is divided into 3 subcategories. So one category, which used to be the most famous category of immigration to Canada, is called Federal Skilled Worker Class or Federal Skilled Worker Program, FSWC or FSWP. A Federal Skilled Worker Program focuses on the skill set of people, their level of education, their work experience, their knowledge of languages, official languages of Canada, their age, and if they have a job offer in Canada, if they have spouses that they have good education or experience in Canada, etc., etc. So that's a well-known method of immigration to Canada. If you qualify for Federal Skilled Worker Program, then you can enter the pool of express entry and apply for immigration. The second group under Federal Express Entry is called Canadian Experience Class. This is reserved for people who have already worked in Canada and now they want to immigrate to Canada. The third group is called Federal Skilled Trades Program or Federal Skilled Trades Class, which covers those skilled trades professionals that they want to immigrate to Canada. They usually need to have job offer from Canada. Express entry system was introduced in 2015. It's fully online and it's the most popular immigration option to Canada. On top of that, we have self-employed class. Self-employed class is not express entry. It's an option for immigration to Canada, which is dedicated to two groups of people, either those people who are active in cultural activities or people who are active in athletics. It's probably one of the most difficult options for immigration to Canada, but it is there and it's a federal option. The third group is called Startup Visa. This is reserved for people who have an innovative idea. There are entrepreneurs, they have innovative ideas, and Canada believes that if they come to Canada and implement that idea, then that hopefully in the future becomes an internationally renowned business. That's why we have the Startup Visa in place. I will, of course, talk about this later on. We also have some other options available to us. For example, for caregivers who already worked as caregivers in Canada may eventually immigrate to Canada. We have options for, in the near future, we will have options for some farm workers that they may apply for immigration to Canada. We have some options for people who could immigrate to Canada because their destination are certain rural areas in Canada. But keep that in mind, those other options, they keep coming and going. So depending on the year that you are watching this, those options may or may not exist. Regardless, I'll try to talk about those options in more details later on. And if you also visit our website, settler.ca, you can clearly see my articles about those immigration options that are available from time to time. Let's also focus on provincial economic immigration. As I mentioned, Quebec has a special agreement with the Government of Canada. It's called Quebec Accord, and based on Quebec Accord, they exclusively focus on their own immigration, mostly on people who know French and they are francophones. The other provinces and territories, they usually have immigration options under two major groups. The first major group is express entry. To be honest with you, express entry for provinces is the same as express entry for federal. So the way it works is that you enter the pool of express entry under the federal programs, and then later on, either you show interest to moving to a specific province, or a specific province finds you worthy of moving to their province and they select you. If that happens, then you receive several points, in fact, up to 600 points on their express entry system. And that means that you will be selected and you can immigrate to Canada, eventually become a permanent resident of Canada. But other than express entry for provinces, many provinces, in fact, they have their own provincial nominee program system, or PNP. PNP means that you, because, for example, you studied in that province, or you worked in that province, or the skill set that you have are important to that province, then the province selects you for immigration to their province. They issue you the certificate of nomination, and based on that certificate of nomination, you can apply for immigration to Canada. I will definitely dedicate one session to provincial nominee programs, and I will try to explain it in more details. The last group of immigrants are refugees. We can divide refugees into two major groups. The first group are those refugees who apply for refugee at a third country. So they are displaced from their home country. They go to another country that country usually doesn't accept immigrants. They refer to UNHCR, or the organization by the United Nations that is responsible for refugees, and they submit their application for asylum. If UNHCR approves them, there are certain countries in this world that they pick those people, and of course Canada is one of the most popular ones. If Canada selects those people, they resettle them to Canada, but as soon as they enter Canada, they enter as permanent residents of Canada. There is another group, those people who apply for refugee at a Canadian port of entry or inside Canada. So somebody at the airport or while they are crossing from the United States to Canada, or while they are inside Canada, for example, they already came here as a tourist or a student, then they file for refugee status. If they get approved, they may apply for permanent residency and become permanent residents. Again, we will dedicate one session to refugees, and obviously I will discuss this in more details. So what about temporary options? So we already talked about organizations in charge of immigration. We talked about immigration options. Now let's talk about temporary options, because not everybody wants to immigrate to Canada and stay for the rest of their lives in Canada. Some people want to be here temporarily. In fact, many people who approach us, they ask for work in Canada. They don't want to be here for life. They want to be here for a short period of time. When we talk about temporary options, it means that you stay in Canada for a few days, for a few weeks, and in some cases for a few months, and then eventually you go back home. We can divide the temporary options probably in 4 major options. So the first one is called TRV, or Temporary Resident Visa. Whoever comes here to Canada on a TRV, or if they are exempt from a TRV on an ETA, or if they are even exempt from ETA on a temporary basis as a visitor, when they come to Canada, it means that they are just visiting. They have no intention to study or work, albeit under special circumstances, even if you are here as a temporary visitor, you might be able to engage in certain jobs, or you might be able to study. An example would be a group of, for example, performing artists. They can come to Canada as visitors and perform in most cases. Or for example, if the course that you are taking in Canada is a short course, it's a 1-week course, then you don't really need a study permit to study in Canada. You can just visit Canada and study. Of course, the devil is in the details. So if you have such intention, make sure to contact a professional to see if you qualify to do those activities without a proper work permit or study permit. The second group of people who are temporary visitors to Canada, they come under something called a TRP, or Temporary Resident Permit. These are people that they are inadmissible to Canada, but under Section 24 of the Act, we can apply for a temporary resident permit for them. If they approved, then depending on the decision by the officer, they may stay in Canada anywhere between 1 day up to 3 years. In very exceptional cases, they may even extend their stay. But generally speaking, it's between 1 day to 3 years that they can stay in Canada. Then, of course, workers. A large number of people who come to Canada, they come here because they want to work. Every single year, about 250,000 to 300,000 people come here temporarily on work permits. These workers, some of them, they are allowed to work for a specific employer. In some cases, they hold open work permits and they may work for any employer. Now, eventually, the work permit could help them to apply for permanent residency of Canada, but generally speaking, work permit is for the purpose of working in Canada on a temporary basis. And I can talk for several hours on different options for work permit, so I'll do my best to dedicate multiple sessions to different aspects of work permit and explain them in details to you. And the last group, major group of temporary residents in Canada, they are students. So Canada accepts students at the elementary schools, at our high schools or secondary schools, colleges, universities. So it could be undergrad programs, which basically are diploma programs, or certificate programs. It could be grad programs like PhD, like different kinds of doctorate programs, and also master's programs. Every year, roughly speaking, about 135,000, 150,000 people, sometimes more than that, and new international students come to Canada, and at a typical time, roughly around 300 to 400,000 international students are in Canada, because Canada offers one of the best educational options to people in English and French languages. And if people come here, they can enhance their language. And of course, it also opens doors for many of those students to immigrate to Canada, especially under many provincial programs. If they go to a specific province and they study there, then after graduations, they may apply for work permit and they may eventually immigrate to Canada. As I mentioned earlier, the topics in this session was just an overall review of the immigration options to Canada. In the future sessions, we will of course focus on the details of any of these. Meanwhile, if you have any questions, feel free to visit our website or call our office or book a consultation session. Don't forget about settler.ca. There are hundreds of articles over there that they explain different aspects of immigration, or consider purchasing my book, 88 Tips on Immigration to Canada. You can find it on your local Amazon store. Thank you very much for watching this video.